G'day, I'm Garry Stevens, and welcome to the third season of the History in the Bible podcast. In this final season, I explore how the Jews and the Christians constructed new religions when they were sent spinning into the void after the destruction of the temple. All of the history about all of the books beyond the Bible. Episode 3.33, Speculations, Part 4. 4 more speculations. I argue that an important element of Christianity's success was that it quickly transformed itself into what I call the imperial church incorporate. Would Christianity have succeeded had it not done so? Second, could Mithraism have triumphed over the church? Third, could Gnostic variants of Christianity come to dominate? Finally, the Jewish arm of the church vanished after the Bar Kosiva revolt of 132. What might have happened had that group survived and thrived? Let's take a look at scenario 9 in my list of speculations. Now, this one comes off, I don't know whether you call it a bugbear or a theory of mine. The scenario we're looking at is, what would have happened if the Christians had developed a different organisational structure? One of my theories is that it was the organisational structure of Christianity which made it such a successful entity. I've never been really convinced by most explanations I've seen for Christianity's success. Most of these explanations talk about the attractiveness of its beliefs, or it talks about how conversions occurred through just converting the paterfamilias, as we discussed last time. I have never seen an explanation which talks about the church's organisation. Now, that could entirely be just because I just haven't read enough. But anyway, it is my contention that the structure of the church was the key factor. I invented the term the imperial church incorporate, which I think is such a nifty little expression, to describe this. So I'm not talking about the church, I'm talking about an imperial organisation, which was the church, and it's a corporation. It's as successful as McDonald's. And I've argued that the structure it created, 3 tiers of bureaucrats, deacons at the bottom, then presbyters who are priests, then bishops, organised based on the diocesan model of the Roman Empire. And by that I mean, round about the year 200, the Emperor Septimius Severus reconstructed the administrative system of the empire. Before him, the major administrative unit was the large province. Septimius split these large provinces into smaller areas he called dioceses. And he did that partly to make sure that no single person in an area would be able to get the military strength to overthrow him, as he had done. These dioceses were taken over intact by the imperial church incorporate. One bishop runs a diocese. It'd be like, say, McDonald's is successful because of its organisation, not necessarily because of the quality of its products, but McDonald's runs over, mom and pop hamburger joints. A mom and pop hamburger joint will never turn into an international franchise the way the McDonald's has done. Let's say I'm right and this organisational structure had some influence. What if the church had never developed that structure? Maybe instead it created a much looser structure like the rabbis did in Judaism at the same time. Now, from what we can gather, there was very little structure to the entire rabbinic system. You just have these teachers, scholars, in a fairly sporadic and loose connection with each other. Well, this loose structure eventually worked for Judaism. Maybe it would have worked for Christianity. Now, let's compare the church structure with the Marcionites and the Montanists. We know that their organisations were eventually crushed. Now, was that because that in the end the state supported Orthodox Christianity, Or, as I suspect, their business model simply failed. It just couldn't stand up to the Christian business model. Any ideas on that?
I think you're really onto something that it was several pieces that fit together, that it was a fairly flat org structure where you had a lot of priests, but then one bishop who really answered for everything. And then that bishop answered to a bigger organization, the conciliar system, where they would meet in councils. And yeah, there would be bishops who were more of precedence, but that really wasn't a day-to-day power. It really wouldn't think of the Pope being able to say, oh, do X, Y, and Z. That doesn't come until the 1200s and the 1300s and really beyond. Been recently talking about the Decapolis. There's a small town, Abila, in the middle of nowhere, and it had 5 churches. But for all those 5 churches, it would have only had one bishop, and that bishop would have been a part of a bigger council. They'd hammer out issues. It was a very flexible organizational structure. So I definitely agree with you that when you have a structure that can see problems coming, it can deal with them in a way that, in a conciliar way, that isn't completely top down. There's a lot of bottom up, but top down, everybody gets on the same page and you can move forward. And if you don't have that, I think that it would be very difficult to move forward. I think it would have been like the Marcionites or the different Gnostic groups that didn't have those structures. Taking the councils with the diocese, with the flat organizational structure that it really is one bishop in one locality, that he doesn't have to snipe with other people to get his way in his territory. They're pretty much a monarch, a sovereign in their district.
And all the evidence we have seems to be that right from the beginning, the bishops communicated with each other quite a lot, didn't they? They were writing letters, talking to each other. So the bishops could get support, and I'm sure that helps sort of knit the entire organisation together in a way we have no evidence for, say, the Marcionites or the Montanists or whatever.
I think it's interesting. I wonder what you think to look at a possible situation where there wasn't that strong support. If you look at the way that the church spread into the Persian Empire, where it had a lot of top down, but it never really built that base of support. The part it was missing was that diocese system. And I wonder if that's maybe a corollary that we could look at.
The Christian church seems to have been very good at sort of taking over Roman administrative structures, tried and tested administrative structures.
One other thing I would say is, like, if you also compare it to Islam, that comes up at a similar time. Islam, I think that element that Islam was connected, so the state and the church and the religion were so interconnected, they were essentially one. Christianity didn't really have that in the Roman Empire. They were connected, but there was never that direct connection of go kill these heretics. Almost all the emperors were like, figure it out, then, we'll do the dirty work. It was never, you're the bad guys, the Aryans, and we're going to directly take you out. It always had to go through the state. So I think that the organizational structure is the thing that ultimately made it thrive in certain settings. And then it collapsed it eventually. I guess that's every organization, really. Its own demise is baked into its own DNA.
Okay, so we seem to agree that the organisational structure had probably quite a strong influence on the success. If it had not had that organisational structure, would the church still have succeeded, do you think?
Maybe not to the level it did. Maybe you get something more like rabbinical Judaism, where it has to have something core that holds it together.
Yeah.
Ethnicity or something.
That's an excellent point. I'd forgotten that the rabbis could rely on ethnicity as a boundary generating mechanism, whereas the Christians obviously certainly didn't have that.
That is an interesting one. I'd love to hear what people have to say about that.
And I'd like to see some academics work on it, because I cannot believe that I'm the first person to have commented on it. That's just impossible. One of the problems we well-meaning amateurs have in podcasting is that we are just that, amateurs, and we do not know what we don't know. Okay, let's move on to scenario 10. Could Mithraism have taken on Christianity? Was it really a viable threat? Here's what I know about Mithraism, and I'm relying on you as the expert, Steve, to correct me.
That's a scary proposition.
Roman Mithraism is a modern term for the worship in the Roman Empire of Mithras, which is the Latinized name of the Zoroastrian god Mithra. Now, apparently scholars do distinguish quite sharply between Roman Mithraism and Persian Mithraism. The Romans themselves knew that Mithras worship had been introduced from Persia. From what we know, Roman Mithraism was actually quite different to Persian. And modern academics, some say, yeah, the ancient Romans were right, and it was a direct transplant from Persia. But others say that Roman Mithraism was actually a pretty much independent movement. And it was developed by a small group in Rome around about the year 100, and it has only a really very tenuous relationship with Persian Mithraism. And that this small group of people basically came up with a new mystery cult, that they took the name from Persia and some various bits of mystical and magical lore, and that's about it. Later church fathers and scholars through to as late as the 20th century painted Christianity and Mithraism as in a death struggle. Mithraism is portrayed as Christianity's greatest enemy. But we actually have no evidence for that from the period when Mithraism was introduced, around about the year 100. We have no contemporary evidence of people saying, oh, these Mithraists, they're going to crush the church. The only evidence we have for conflict is that the two religions competed for real estate. I want to build a church here. No, we'd mark that out for our Torabolium, it was called, I think. So it's entirely possible that there wasn't that big of a conflict. Anyway, let's say that Mithraism is going fairly well. Let's say that Christianity was never made the state religion, so it doesn't have the power and might of the military behind it. Could Mithraism have ended up as the major religion of the Roman Empire? Here's a quote from a scholar called A.D. Nock. He was very skeptical about this. He said, had Christianity perished early, we should not then have had a Mithraic world. We might have had a world in which Mithraism itself was the special devotion of a few, but in which it had been otherwise absorbed in a solar piety. He argues basically that Mithraism would have transmuted out of existence. I'm not so sure. Any ideas?
I don't know if it would have just blinked out of existence. I wonder if it would have been Mithraism with a lot of the different mystery cults would have been like add-ons to Christianity or to other things. You pointed out in the notes something like the Rotary, or in the U.S. we have the VFW, of Veterans of Foreign Wars, where like the Rotary or like these other clubs, people would go and hang out. I never got the sense that it was a religion in and of itself, that the whole family went to the Mithraeum on a certain day. I think it was a men's club predominantly, wasn't it?
That's the impression I get. Wasn't it very popular with the army?
Yeah.
There's no impression of sort of little kiddies going onto the Torabolium to kill a bull or something. If Mithraism was in fact that, it couldn't really have competed with Christianity, could it?
No, I don't think it could have, especially so in a world. I think like maybe that scholar was saying that it would have bolstered the sun worship of Sol Invictus. maybe Sol Invictus would have become more of a going concern against Christianity, because I mean, we see, I think it was Pope Gregory the Great in the late 500s, early 600s, admonished the people after the Easter service. In the morning, they went out and said some sort of praise to the sun, and that's in the 500s.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
So things like that stuck around for quite some time, some vestige of solar worship. And I think maybe in the West, there would have been something else going on. I think in the East, from everything that I've seen, between the really large Jewish population and then the rising Christian population, that they had gone in this monotheistic direction. The West, the whole religious situation, even up to Constantine's very confusing. It didn't seem like people were really Jupiter guys anymore.
No.
It was maybe more of a animist ancestor worship. They didn't have a religion as this thing to a vague worship of the state and the emperor. But I mean, how are you going to worship an emperor like some of those dullards at the end of the line? So I don't think that was really holding everyone together. Would it have been Mithraism, or would it have been a sort of diverse set of cults that everybody's somewhat pulling in the same direction, but it's not as unifying as one of these monotheistic religions? Maybe everybody has some worship of Sol Invictus, but they have the add-on, oh, I'm a Mithraism guy myself. I wonder why Mithraism didn't hang around as a Rotary type group.
I mean, the Christians resisted the state persecution of Diocletian. Here's a question. Why didn't, say, the Mithraists successfully resisted the state persecution of them after about, I think, 395? Christianity was made compulsory and the state religion. Why did they fold?
I mean, maybe it really did morph into the old boys club of military veterans. They do their thing. It's kind of weird. The priest or the bishop preaches, you really shouldn't go there. Nothing has been recorded. It could just be an absence of evidence. There was really no point because, like you said, with all these things with the sun that did hang around, it's a cultural memory that this sun worship is something that we should do, and we're attaching it to this Christian thing that we do that's kind of similar.
Now we move on to my 11th. Gnosticism takes on the imperial church incorporated. In our world, the high period of the Gnostics seems to have been somewhere between 150 to 250, and they started vanishing after that. Although Gnostic elements certainly stayed in Christianity right through to the High Middle Ages. The Bogomils, and I remember various drives against heretical Gnostic sects in France and Germany during the High Middle Ages. Yeah, the Cathars. So the Gnostics' beliefs must have been very appealing. But what if, say, the Gnostics had just managed to take over? The church absorbed Gnostic beliefs totally. So you would have several gods or demigods. You would have the demiurge, the world's creator. I suppose you'd still have the same emphasis on good versus evil. And I think, for a start, the Jewish roots of Christianity would have been forgotten if it went full Gnostic. And it would have made a merger with the later movement of the Manichees much easier.
In Christianity, you see, there's always this push and pull, and maybe it's with all religions, but especially Christianity, of Gnosticism, and then on the one side, and Arianism or subordinationism on the other side. So this hyper spiritual, everything, the material world's bad, to the other side where the material world's perfectly fine. That's what we live in. we make it better. But so materiality and that struggle over what was Jesus? If Jesus became incarnate, why would he become incarnate if all materiality is bad and only spirituality is the true thing? So I think I think there would have been a lot more conflict in the church. I mean, probably even conflict that could have wrecked the whole thing. If you had a strong that Jesus is only a spiritual being and that all materiality is bad. I mean, you even see that push and pull with monasticism. One other point is that I think scholars are starting to say that maybe Gnosticism wasn't such a separate thing as from Orthodoxy, that, again, Gnosticism was sort of an add-on, that any individual person who's sitting in a nominally Orthodox church would just understand things in their own Gnostic way, and maybe they'd have a little Gnostic club afterwards. We're the Gnostic Club, and we're going to meet on Wednesday nights to do this. After pizza, then we'll do our Gnostic stuff. I mean, that's a possibility. I think that is probably more to your point, that it's not that there was a separate Gnostic church that's the church that ultimately won out. It's that a Gnostic ideology is the thing that took over. And I wonder, do you think that would have worked? Especially inside of what we were talking about with the organizational structure?
Because Gnostic beliefs are very Baroque. Is it Baroque or Baroque?
I think it is Baroque. I've always said Baroque, but I think it is Baroque.
Given that, could it have been very difficult for the bishops to enforce homogeneity? From the documents I've seen of the Gnostics, their beliefs are really very complicated and all over the place. A bishop talking to your average pleb, and the plebs, I don't know, asking what Jesus is. I suppose the bishop could give a fairly concise answer, but trying to get across Gnostic beliefs, and you would think it'd be quite easy. Yeah, actually, for the whole system to fall apart. Bishop over here believes in the eons and these gods and these demigods, but the other bishop, no. It was really this way. So maybe there wasn't the homogeneity of belief sufficient to survive.
Yeah, I think that's probably, especially if that had happened right before, say, the Council of Nicaea, even before the time of when Theodosius made Christianity the official religion. If it had already splintered, why would Constantine want to pick this religion to be the uniting factor of an empire when a good percentage of them believe that it's on the eons and the demiurges and all that, and then another group, adoptionists, that kind of has a Gnostic flair to it? I wonder how much Gnosticism would become a really wide-ranging movement when you really have to have it where you have the people who believe that they have the special inside knowledge, and then you have to have the other people who believe that they don't have it. I guess you would have to really truly believe that whoever the perfecti, I think they called them, they had different rankings and this and that you would really have to buy into the system. Not only do you have to buy into the beliefs, you have to buy into the system as well.
Yeah, if you have these various grades of initiation, and I think in the Gnostics, it's only the top lot who actually know what they're talking about, and they tell the people lower down, no, there are more secrets to go. Why would you stay there unless you thought you could eventually reach the top?
Or you were fine with whatever your lot wound up being. But I think that would have a limited appeal. You can go to church and Father O'Callahan is a jerk, but it doesn't really affect you. It's not impacting your connection at all. If you're not a perfecti, you don't have to be the priest. If you're an average Christian in the 300s, your goal isn't necessarily to be the Patriarch of Jerusalem.
Whereas if you're Gnostic, your goal is to become one of the pure or the perfect.
The way that I understood it, and maybe I'm incorrect in this, is that it spread very quickly and widely, but it doesn't sound like it went very deep into the places that it spread to. Kind of like Christianity, once it spread into Central Asia and then even into China, it sort of burnt itself out.
And that's the sort of impression you get with Gnosticism too, isn't it? It's not making deep roots. One day we will find a whole new bunch of histories and scrolls. So archaeologists, keep digging, guys.
I read an interesting article that they're using AI to start reading ancient documents, apparently in cuneiform. They have so many clay tablets, but not nearly enough people, grunts basically, grad students, to just do a rough translation of them. But apparently AI can do a pretty decent job to get you basically the Google Translate version of a cuneiform. It can scan the cuneiform and get something decent of a translation that the scholar can dig into. I bet you that's something that our old buddy the Kipper, Kip Swinney, is into. I think that was his thing, was these ancient languages.
We wouldn't be smart enough to become an ancient linguist, would we?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. Not me. Speaking for myself.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, my 12th scenario. What if the Jewish wing or faction of the Christian church had remained a strong force? Now, we think that the Jewish wing pretty much disappeared after the Bar Kosiva revolt in around 130. The Jerusalem Club seems to have really been that. It was a club in Jerusalem preaching to Judeans, whereas people like Paul had gone out into the big world. But we do know that they hung around until at least the year 130, because I was going to say Eusebius, because as we've said before, the answer to any question in early Christian studies is Eusebius. I think he had a list of the bishops of Jerusalem. Until the Bar Kosiva revolt, they're all Hebrew names. After that, they're all Greek names. Pretty good indicator something bad has happened. So after 130, the church didn't have to contend with a powerful and potent Jewish wing. Only the Ebionites seem to have remained as a very much rump force, not affecting much at all. And I think the church fathers do comment on the Ebionites, but even by about the year 300, the Ebionites seem to have been disappearing. But what if the Jewish wing had remained strong and influential?
What do you think they would have looked like? Because we don't get a real strong description of what the Ebionites, or even if they necessarily existed in the form that we think they would have, or the Jerusalem Club. Especially, what would they have looked like after the destruction of the temple?
That's a good question. Would they just... Well, I suppose they must have regarded themselves as the true Jews, the true interpreters of the law. Would they have assigned a divine status to Jesus, or was he just an earthly Messiah?
And I kind of get the gist that there was a spectrum of belief inside of that. Was he a sort of a divine Messiah? Was he the greatest prophet of them all? And everything in between. Would their worship, because I guess that would have been the thing that would have started to separate them from proto-Orthodox Christians and Jews, because they're obviously they're going to have to do something after the fall of the temple. Before the fall of the temple, I wonder, were they still sacrificing at the temple?
Well, the impression I certainly get is that the Jewish wing sacrificed at the temple because they were Jews, right? We're the real ones. But after the temple's gone, we can't do our sacrificing anymore, an issue which would be irrelevant to the pagan members. I tend to think they would have become a separate sect, independent of the pagan Christians. I think the Jewish Christians would have either become a separate sect. By Constantine's time, had they survived in numbers, they would not have been recognised as Christians at all.
I think that the two magnets would have been set because the rabbinical Jews, it took them a long time to figure out what they had to do to get past the temple.
True.
And the Christians had more of an idea coming out of it, the Pauline Christians, that the temple didn't necessarily have to be the center of the universe anymore. I wonder if that would have attracted some of these Jewish Christians. Or do they wind up just forming up their own thing, but do they accept the Talmud? In a way, do they go a third way and figure out their own thing? I think they would have needed to sort of an add-on speculation to this is what if all these revolts don't happen? The temple's destroyed, but there's no Bar Kosiva revolt and there's no Keto's war. And what if those hadn't happened? Because I think that those, especially the Bar Kosiva revolt, really blew them up.
That was the big one. Even the Great Revolt did not have the significant effects that the Bar Kosiva revolt had. In the Bar Kosiva revolt, it seems that Judea was almost depopulated. The city was razed to the ground. Jews were forbidden to enter. They were far, far harsher things than happened after the Great Revolt.
You maybe don't get the Greco-Roman Jews living in the diaspora joining up with Pauline Christianity as much. Maybe they get pulled into one direction, into the more Jerusalem club-based Christianity versus Judaism. Does this third way, the Jerusalem club-based Christianity, do they wind up seeing that the Pauline, more Greco-Roman Christians are more of their brethren, or is it the proto-rabbinical Jews? Do they see them more as their brethren, or do they say, hey, we're the third way, we're better than you, and we're better than you, and we're going to do our own thing?
I think the third way followers would have seen nothing to attract them in pagan Christianity because I think ethnicity would have triumphed over everything. I think they would have allied themselves with the Jerusalem Club and with the eventual rabbinic system. I think there would have been a quite sharp cleavage with the pagan Gentile section. But it is lost, in effect, to history because history is very good at expunging things when it wants to.
Yeah, and probably the crux of this speculation would be is how, because it's pretty clear that some of the Jews respected James the Just. I mean, they discussed that in Josephus, but then a lot of them hated his guts. But then we also see in the book of Acts where James the Just wants to hammer out a deal and go along to get along. Now, is that just how things are recorded in the book of Acts?
I think the book of Acts goes out of its way to show Peter, James, and Paul as moderately good chums with some differences. I mean, if you look at Paul's letters, he's a lot harsher against Peter there than is displayed in Acts. Thanks for visiting. For show notes, maps, charts, and timelines, visit my website at www.historyinthebible.com. You can even download professional posters for free.